Hi, I'm Pam Fox at pamfox.org, and today I'm streaming live on YouTube into the Plantar Reflux Facebook group. If you haven't joined the Plantar Reflux Facebook group, it is a support group for people who are trying a plant-based diet that eliminates all common trigger foods for reflux. You can find it in Facebook. Just search Plantar Reflux. You can request to join. Um, and today I'm going to be talking about trigger foods. And if you have my book is on sale this month on Amazon. I put the link in the description box below here on YouTube. You can go to Amazon and just search Plantar Reflux by Pam Fox. It's on sale. And the topic today is we're going to revisit common trigger foods, which we eliminate in this plant-based diet to heal reflux. You can get this PDF for free in the support group on Facebook. It's also included in my book, Plantar Reflux. So those are the two places you can get it. And I'm just going to go through these today, and we're going to kind of revisit these different trigger foods, and I'm going to talk a little bit about each one. This will probably be a fairly short video, but I'm going to talk about each of these trigger foods and kind of explain why they trigger. Just because I think that if we understand like why certain foods are bothering us, we might be a little bit more likely to maybe abstain from eating those foods if we kind of make that connection, like that it's a real thing, that these foods are actually triggering my reflux. I want to say before we get into this, and you'll hear me say this a lot, that it's important when addressing reflux or many of the other symptoms that often accompany reflux, when you're trying to address these conditions naturally, not just trying to take a pill and ease your symptoms, but you're trying to really heal this condition. It's really, really important that you do it comprehensively, right? That you look at you really understand the different facets of this condition. So some people, they'll just take a pill, or other people are more like healing minded and they'll want to, heal the condition. And so they'll make maybe some changes in their diet, or others will buy my hiatal hernia course and they'll just focus on the hiatal hernia, but they'll make no changes to their diet. Okay, so what I'm getting at is that when you treat this condition comprehensively, you're really doing everything you can to promote that healing, right? And if you're missing a piece of the puzzle, then it could be that you're still doing something that supports the condition. You're still doing something that's exacerbating or flaring up that condition. And so it's so important to understand, like, what can I do to take control of this situation? What can I do to promote healing and to not exacerbate the condition, right? Because a lot of times with a lot of illness, that's the problem. Like, we're doing something that's supporting or exacerbating the condition. So we need to figure out what that is and remove that from the puzzle. And then do things that promote the healing. All right, so with that said, we're going to go through this list. Again, if you're on, I'll tell you how to find it. If you're in the Plantar Reflux support group on Facebook, it's over on the right hand side. You'll see, in the menu under files, you can click on that, and all of the free files that I've listed in the group are there. And this one's called Common Triggers for Reflux. What else is in there? Pam's favorite tools in the kitchen, whole plant foods list, common triggers for reflux, and then there's a shopping list as well for trying the 30-day plant-based challenge. 30-day plant-based challenge that eliminates common trigger foods for reflux. So that's how you find this PDF, and you can print that out and you can put it on your refrigerator so you can kind of have a reminder, like, these are the foods I need to abstain from eating during this 30-day challenge. And the other thing I'll mention before I get into this is a lot of people ask, well, why a plant-based challenge? Why can't I just do an acid watcher diet? Well, you can just do an acid watcher diet. In fact, I've been recommending this for a long time before I wrote my own cookbook. The difference between this book and my book is that his book, Dr. Jonathan Aviv, focuses on a lot of whole plant foods, organic foods, eliminating the common trigger foods, but it's not a plant-based diet. Now, he does encourage one vegan meal a day, all right, so that you're reducing the intake of meat, dairy, and eggs. And if you look through the recipes in here, they're very low in meat, dairy, and eggs. There's a lot of vegetarian and vegan recipes in here. So I think the difference is, you know, a lot of people and a lot of doctors especially, they have this mindset that to tell their patients or to recommend to their patients a plant-based diet is setting them up for failure because it's so hard to be on a plant-based diet, which I don't think it's hard at all. I thought it was going to be hard when I first tried it, but because I really um, prepared myself, I really educated myself, I had a plan, I had support in place, I really had all these different things in place, which I talk a lot about in my book to really kind of help set you up for success if you're trying a plant-based diet for 30 days for the first time. Um, yeah, if you just decide one day, yeah, I'll try that vegan diet, and you don't really educate yourself and prepare yourself and have your plan in place, which I talk about in my book, and have support in place, which I talk about, like a Facebook group like this or any other number of, you know, vegan or plant-based support groups that are online. If you don't kind of have those things in place, then you're not setting yourself up for success. So getting back to, you know, a lot of doctors, they know the health benefits of a plant-based diet, but they don't always recommend it because they they find that their patients won't try it, or that they will try it and then they'll just fail and that they'll revert back to the way they were eating. So then the logical better option would be everything in moderation, right? And that's what they'll usually say, everything in moderation. And so in the acid watcher diet, really they get you down to a pretty low fat diet because the high fat foods are part of the problem with reflux, which we're going to talk about. So I would encourage you, if you've already tried my 30-day challenge with the plantar reflux and you really struggled with it, and I would suggest a couple of things. One, you could try a diet like this that does have a little bit of meat, dairy, and eggs in it. It's a little bit more probably realistic for someone who really is struggling on a plant-based diet. But also, if you're struggling on a plant-based diet, to revisit that chapter in my book that talks about preparing you, helping you devise your plan. What's your support system that you're going to have in place? Are you going to, what about your family? Like, what are they going to do while you're doing this 30-day challenge? You really have to ask yourself those questions and know what the answers are before you dive in to trying a plant-based diet, because you kind of have to have those questions answered before you get started. Okay, so on the common triggers food for reflux, I know I keep holding this up and you can't really see it, but it's there in the files group on the plantar reflux support group. And we'll just go through these. The first one is high-fat foods. So it says that this includes meat, dairy, eggs, and oils of any kind. So why high-fat? What's the problem with high-fat foods? Well, first of all, I need to remind you that fat in your diet is very important. Just because I'm on a plant-based or a vegan diet doesn't mean I don't eat fat. I eat plenty of fat. In fact, sometimes I think I eat too much fat. Not that, you know what I mean? Like if I go overboard and just kind of indulge in certain things. But high fat foods, and your meat and your dairy and your eggs, these are some of the highest fat foods. And then oils, of course, are pure fat. These are your highest fat foods. And so if you're eating a diet that's really rich in these foods, you're eating a diet that's really rich in fat, right? So on this 30-day challenge, we eliminate that. We just eliminate that source, and instead we get all of our fats from plant sources. So avocados, olives, nuts, nut butters, seeds, coconut. So, get our healthy fats straight from the plants. And fats are in all plants, okay? They're in a small amount, but there's fat, protein, and carbohydrate in all plant foods. So really, when you're on a plant-based diet, you're really getting the perfect amount of fat, the perfect amount of protein, and the perfect amount of carbohydrate, because all of those plant foods were designed to provide the body with, these ideal ratios of these nutrients, these macronutrients. So we eliminate these high-fat foods, and instead we get our fat from the plants that we eat, and particularly the high-fat plants like avocado. And I know that some of you might be saying right now, oh, avocado really sets me off. I can't eat avocado, and that may be the case. So, and that's the other thing with this challenge, is you really need to figure out and establish which foods you can and you can't eat. This is a good way to start. Eliminating these foods for a month and seeing how you do. And if you do really well, then you know that your culprits are in this list somewhere. But then you can start to reintroduce things one at a time and figure out, yes, I can, no, I can't. Yes, I can eat this, no, I can't eat that. All right, so your high-fat foods, that includes meat, dairy, and eggs, and oils of any kind. Number 2 is highly processed foods. And again, your highly processed foods, especially things like donuts and candy bars, crackers, potato chips, these highly processed foods are also going to be, by default, high fat foods, right? Well, I shouldn't say that. They're high fat foods by definition, many of them, unless they're like a low fat junk food. But you want to stay away from those as well because of the acid content. So typically your highly processed foods, it says foods that are shelf stable and include a variety of chemicals and preservatives. So it's these chemicals and preservatives in a lot of these so-called highly processed foods. They're very acidic. They're going to be very acidic on the pH scale. And so we know for people with reflux, we need to avoid these acidic foods, particularly for people with LPR, which is the upper reflux or the laryngopharyngeal reflux, otherwise known as silent reflux. You really want to be watching the ingredients. You really want to be eating as many whole organic foods as you can and avoiding highly acidic foods if you have silent reflux. But in general, you want to avoid highly processed foods for this 30-day challenge so that you can really give the system a chance to heal, because the highly processed foods are going to be irritants as well. They're going to be acidic, which makes them an irritant, and we're going to talk a lot about that as we go through these lists, these different highly acidic foods that can cause additional, and that's what I was saying before. So if you've got an esophagus, a lower esophageal sphincter, your stomach, the lining, all of that, if it's irritated and injured and inflamed because of this, could be multiple intestinal issues, but reflux, we're talking specifically about reflux. If those tissues are irritated, injured, and inflamed, and then you continue to eat foods that cause more irritation, injury, and inflammation. Remember, inflammation is just a response to the injury. It's trying to heal that injury, but then you drink more Pepsi and you eat more potato chips and you drink more coffee and you drink more beer or whatever, these so-called acidic foods, that are higher on that pH scale in acidity, then you're going to continue to irritate those tissues, including the LES. And remember, the LES is that little valve where the stomach and the esophagus connect, and its job is to stay closed. It only opens when you swallow food to let the food to drop into the stomach, and then it's, and then there's a couple other times it's supposed to open. But in general, it's supposed to stay tight to keep those contents in the stomach where they belong, to keep that acid, that stomach acid, in the stomach where it belongs. And so if our LES begins to become weak and opening up all the time, then yeah, we're going to have that reflux and regurgitation. So you've got to avoid those high-fat foods as much as possible, and you've got to avoid the highly processed foods. And going back to the high-fat foods, if you're really a stickler on eating a few of these animal foods, like maybe an egg here and there, or certain things, watch how you're cooking them. Make sure you're not cooking them with oil. Make sure you're not piling on cheese. Make sure you're not piling on bacon. Other foods that are high in fat. So how you cook those foods makes a difference as well. The meat, dairy, and eggs are going to be high in fat by default, but how you cook them can make them even higher in fat. And certainly the number of times you eat them in a day is going to affect your reflux as well. So if you absolutely can't, go 100% plant-based, I always encourage people to try it for 1 month. You can try anything for 1 month. But if you've found that you've tried it and you absolutely can't, you want to find that maybe that compromise where you've really reduced the amount of meat, dairy, and eggs and oils, and you've learned how to cook them in ways that doesn't add in more fat. Number 3, processed sugar and sweeteners, including honey. Now, I know honey can be of benefit, but again, when you have tissues that are already irritated and injured and inflamed, and then you are eating a lot of sugar, and that can include honey, those sweeteners can add to that irritation and injury, right? So what I was saying before, we're doing something that's supporting the condition by, every time we swallow food, right? So that sugar goes down the esophagus and it irritates highly processed sugar. So I'm talking about high fructose corn syrup, even table sugar or junk foods, which is going to be filled with high fructose corn syrup. So these are your processed sugars and sweeteners. You want to avoid honey in the 30-day challenge, and then you can try it. Have a cup of chamomile tea with a little bit of honey in it after 30 days and see how you do. And if you do fine, then that's not going to be an issue for you. But you want to eliminate those processed sugars. And as you eliminate these junk foods or these highly processed foods, that's going to take care of the bulk of it. get your sugars from fruit. Okay, get your sugars from whole, organic if you can, fruit. And if you can't get organic, like if you're eating an apple, you want to wash it really well with some, you know, whatever you're using to wash your fruit to get off any of those chemicals or preservatives, or pesticides or whatever might be on your fruit. So make sure you're washing it if it's not organic, because that any of those things on the fruit are gonna exacerbate the condition as well. So you want to be eating good, clean, organic if you can fruit, instead of sugar and instead of junk food. Number 4 is spicy foods, and that includes hot spices and peppers. So your hot spices, your hot peppers, same thing. When you eat that spicy food, there's an agitation effect to the tissues. Now, if you might be thinking to myself, when I was young and healthy, when I was young, I could eat all these foods and I didn't have an issue. Well, if you think about it, it could be, years after years of eating these spicy foods where the agitation occurs from these spicy foods, the tissues are irritated, and then the body starts to heal those tissues. And before, between the period of lunch, let's say you have a spicy lunch and then a spicy dinner, you've got that period of time in between, and maybe that was enough for your body to heal and overcome that irritation or that injury. Okay, but then there comes a time where the body begins, that immune response begins to lag a little bit and begins to tire a little bit and begins to have trouble really keeping up with meal after meal after meal of spicy foods, sugary foods, acidic foods, fatty foods. And so then what you have is this ongoing state of inflammation where the tissues are always in a state of inflammation because the body is always trying to heal those injured tissues. So that's why the 30-day challenge is so important. You take a whole month to eat a really healthy plant-based diet void of these trigger foods so that you're eliminating what's causing the irritation to the tissues, and you're eating foods that are filled with nutrition, filled with vitamins, filled with hopefully healing properties, so that you can really kind of get ahead of that race and make some gains in healing itself. And then you can slowly begin to add foods in one at a time to see, which foods are still going to be an issue for you and which aren't. All right, next is alcohol. So alcohol can be acidic by default. Wine in particular has what we call carminative properties. So I learned all about carminatives from Dr. Aviv in his book, and a couple of other of my mentors who I've learned from over the years. Foods with carminative properties, and he doesn't go too much into depth what that means, so I kind of had to just look it up and learn for myself. But foods with carminative properties are plant-based foods that are typically foods that are considered very healthy and beneficial, like garlic and onions. So these carminative properties aren't necessarily the culprit, but because they have carminative properties combined with the fact that you have reflux is why we have to eliminate the foods that are known carminatives. And so what carminatives do is really they provide kind of a soothing type of a relief for the digestive tract when we have things like gas or bloating. Okay, so if you eat a bunch of food and you've got gas and bloating, and there was food, maybe you drink, a glass of wine with the food, or maybe the food has garlic and onions in it, or some of these other foods that are highly carminative. So you've got the gas, you've got the bloating, and you combine that with foods that are carminative. What those carminative properties aim to do is to relieve those gaseous pressures. So what's going to happen? Your LES is going to relax and open up, and then you're able to have reflux. You might have belching to try to reduce or release that pressure, but you're also going to have potentially reflux. So it's really important to understand some of these different foods that are high on the chart in terms of carminative properties. Wine is one, garlic and onions are a big one, mint. There's a lot of herbs that are considered carminative that have these, carminative properties, but mint is kind of high on the list. Chocolate. So those are kind of the top ones: wine, chocolate, garlic and onions, and mint. So we want to avoid alcohol in general because by default, most alcohol is acidic. There are some exceptions. What does Dr. Aviv say? If you're really looking for an alcohol that may work for you, Um, let's see here. I was hoping that it might just open right up to that page, but I'm not. Hang on just a second. I have my glasses on. Oh, here it is. Um, so he suggests trying potato and corn-based varieties of vodka in limited amounts. And he says it suggests only in the maintenance phase. So not while you're doing the 30-day challenge. So yeah, potato or corn-based varieties of vodka. Okay. All right. So, and then the next one on the list is smoking. So, and it doesn't matter what you're smoking. It's the same thing with when you're smoking. There's a lot of acidic property that is inhaling and going into the lungs, but it goes down the esophagus and it affects the esophagus as well. So that's a big one. You guys, if you have reflux and you're miserable and you're trying to heal it naturally and you're continuing to smoke, I don't give you much hope. I don't see it happening. I mean, maybe in a very small group of people, but smoking cigarettes in particular is a big one. And I've heard that smoking marijuana is bad as well, particularly because of the relaxative effect that it can have on that LES. But I haven't found any research or studies that supports that. But it sounds good. So at least for the 30 days to give your body that time to heal, you want to avoid smoking. Next up is carbonated soda and beverages. Obviously, the carbonation can be an issue, but the like sodas, like Pepsi and Coke and that kind of thing, they're just loaded with high fructose corn syrup. So you want to avoid those. They're very, very, very acidic. Very, very, very acidic. So you want to avoid sodas unless you can find something, that's lower on the acidity chart. I don't know of any, but I haven't really looked. Next is coffee and most teas, and I put on here that chamomile, ginger, or turmeric are sometimes okay. So if you're eliminating coffee and you're trying to figure out maybe which tea will work for you, try some of these that I've suggested, or try your favorite tea and see how you do. Really just kind of have to trial and error to see what maybe or maybe won't work for you. But coffee, definitely, for the 30-day challenge, you want to eliminate the coffee because it's highly acidic. And then chocolate, we already mentioned that. It has carminative properties, and that can be a big one for people with reflux. A lot of people with reflux swear, I can't even go near chocolate. It's really causes flare-ups. So that's a big one. And then tomatoes as well are highly acidic. So tomatoes, tomato sauces. In my cookbook, I have a safe marinara sauce that's basically a sauce that can be used for things like spaghettis, lasagnas, and soups and stews in replace of tomatoes. And it's made with beets and carrots and celery. And it's pretty good. It's got some Italian spices in it. It's pretty good. So you might want to check that out. There's also a sauce on the market called no mato sauce that you can buy. I think Walmart and Target have it. You might want to look that up, but it's a jarred tomato or Italian spaghetti sauce that's called no mato sauce. And it's made with beets and carrots and celery and that kind of thing. No onions, no garlic. At least my recipe has no onions and garlic. And then up next on the list is onions and garlic. Again, they're highly carminative. So if you're eating foods that have garlic and onions and you get just a little bit of bloating or gas, which happens when we eat, then that LES, because of the garlic and onions, is going to be more likely to be loose instead of to be tight. Vinegar and or other fermented foods. So again, we're getting into examples of foods that can be highly beneficial, like dark chocolate, tomatoes, and onions and garlic. These are all highly beneficial, nutritious plant foods. But if you have reflux and you're trying to take a 30-day challenge and heal your reflux, you want to avoid these foods. And when it comes to vinegar or fermented foods, they're higher in acidity on the pH scale. So they're more highly acidic, and you just want to avoid them, at least for that 30-day challenge. If you can, it's important to eat fermented foods though. So if you can reincorporate those in at a later time, I would really recommend and suggest and encourage that you do so. I love vinegar. I cook a lot with vinegar. I haven't found a lot of fermented foods that I'm crazy for. I like what's it called? The cabbage. I've got kimchi in my brain, but that's not what I'm trying to think of. The German cabbage fermented. Oh my gosh. Anyway, you guys know what I'm talking about. I'll think of it in a second. I like that. It's okay, but I'm just too lazy to make it. You chop up all the cabbage and you have to set it on the counter for several days. And when sauerkraut, thanks, Sophia. It's like maybe when you buy it in the store, you need to buy it in the refrigerator section so it's got all that live probiotic in it if you want the nutrition from it. And so I don't know. I don't buy it that often, but I do make and drink my own water kefir, which is a highly probiotic beverage that is fermented, and it can be good for restoring the healthy flora in the gut. Which oftentimes people with reflux, that is an issue for them, that they've got, they've established poor flora in the gut or an imbalance in the microbiome. So eating those fermented foods can be a very beneficial thing for that. And some people, my mom, she'll she cans her own pickles, and she'll get a little bit of reflux and just take a couple bites of a pickle and she feels better. So when it comes to fermented foods, it's not gospel. If you're taking the 30-day challenge, I would advise you to eliminate them, but I would definitely advise you to reintroduce them and see how you do, because some people find that fermented foods actually ease their reflux. So I would say that if you have reflux, particularly up high, the LPR, that's when it's more important to avoid the fermented foods, because the acid, the throat is getting exposed to that acid every time you swallow those foods. All right, next is citrus, pineapple, and strawberries. So these are all fruits that are highest on the list in the fruit category in terms of alkalinity versus acidity. So they're more acidic. And if you're taking the 30-day challenge, you want to avoid them. Of course, try them again during the healing phase, which is after the 30 days. And if you get, immediate flare-up or reflux or whatever symptoms that you have that come with your reflux, then you know that you're not ready for these more acidic fruits at this time, but it doesn't mean that you can't be ready necessarily for them at another time, okay? There was a time when I just could not do raw onions and garlic, even after I'd made a lot of gains in my healing. And now today I notice, if I go to a restaurant and there's some I forget to ask them to take out the raw onions or something like that, and I don't really like raw onions, but if I bite into it and eat it, I just had a dish the other day that had raw onions in it, and I ate the whole thing, and I didn't even pick out the onions because I didn't notice that they tasted bad. They didn't taste that bad. So anyway, I didn't have any issue. So it's this healing process. It can be an ongoing process as long as you continue to take care of yourself. And then I've got mint on here, which I already mentioned is a highly carminative herb. And then the last thing I have on the list is any food that makes you bloat or experience reflux. So, again, this is just kind of a foundation that you can go off of, but there may be, some people say, oh, I can't eat cucumbers or I can't eat bananas or whatever. And I think to myself, wow, those are typically pretty safe foods. And so if there are certain foods that you think, most people really don't have a reaction to these foods, I wonder why I do. One, everybody's different, and it could just be that your body is having a reaction to that food. You have a sensitivity to that food for whatever reason, but it might be that you're not even really that sensitive to it. It might just be coincidence. You might have eaten that food with another food, or right before or after another food, or another beverage, something else that actually caused the reflux, and it wasn't necessarily the banana or the cucumber. I'm not saying your bananas and your cucumbers can't cause reflux. I believe you, but it is important to really trial and error these things, right? So if you have a banana smoothie and let's say you did a green smoothie with bananas and avocado and kale, it might not have been the banana. It could have been the avocado, which is a high-fat food. So you kind of have to make a banana smoothie with just banana and water to determine if that's really a trigger for you or not. Okay? All right, so that's it. Now, next week, at this same time, I'm going to be addressing one of your questions. I had a viewer that asked me a really good question that's going back to, it's going to cover reflux and hiatal hernia. So we'll be talking about that next week. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.